Good to see everyone here on another Tuesday at the Voice of College Football. And you know what that means. Hawkeyes Live leads us off for the night. We're here every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 where it counts, talking Hawkeyes. And the team's about to hit the field for fall practice. Corey Brad is here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. It's a stormy morning here in Iowa, and the sun has come out this afternoon. I'm sure it's another muggy day. I've been working inside all day, but yep, Qual Camp starts tomorrow, and plenty of position battles to follow. I kind of did a wrap up the other day based on what we heard at Big Ten Media Days. We'll get Iowa Media Day here in a week and a half. So lots in the pipeline, and August 31st going to creep up on people.
It is. We're looking at August 1st tomorrow, I do believe. And so we're into August and
no, hold on. August 1st is Thursday.
Okay, Thursday. I never
Close
know
enough.
the dates anymore.
Close enough.
Once I left a job where I had to know dates and it was constantly in my face, I tend to know, okay, I need to do this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but the dates, don't always know the dates. Okay, Thursday's August 1st. Very good. And so the 31st, we're looking at 4 weeks from Saturday. Very nice. Folks, leave your comments and questions in the chat. Corey and I will get to those. Consider the Super Chat contribution as well, or you can hit me up at Venmo, PayPal, or Cash App. Just make sure that you designate it for the Iowa show. So, fall camp. This team seems to be pretty well buttoned up. Do you recall seasons gone by in which it appears as though we know what the running back rotation is going to be? We're not necessarily that optimistic about the wide receiver production, but it seems to be fairly clear cut who's in play. The tight end position is a 1-2. Definitely a 1-2 there. The offensive line, obviously the defense is locked in pretty much on all three levels. So where are you looking for the next month in regards to any kind of storylines or guys that need to break through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most of it's depth. I mean, it's just how many guys do you have at each position? I think after last week, it's easy to say offensive line based on what Kirk is telling people. That offensive line he's comfortable with 7 guys. He said several times he thinks they have a chance at having 7 starting caliber offensive linemen. That's a luxury they haven't had in recent times. So, I don't think Kirk would ever use the term buttoned up to describe his team. I know he wouldn't, even prior to camp starting. But yeah, offensive line applies. Linebacker, it applies, right? You got 3 guys, the clear cut, Nick Jackson, Jay Higgins, and Kyler Fisher. And then talent behind those guys, but 3, again, starting caliber guys, maybe more. We just don't have the proven experience there. You mentioned running back. They got 4 guys who proved themselves. I think Kamari Moulton is going to play more than people maybe think. And I don't know what the future for Jazz Patterson is. I really like the young man. I thought it was odd that he lost weight. I'm going to hopefully get a chance to chat with Jazz at Media Day. But yeah, I mean, running back there, at least 4 deep. It looks like Terrell Washington's going to play a lot as a receiver. And you're right about receiver. Like, they don't have, who's going to be the star? I don't know that they have one. Kirk addressed that at Big Ten Media Days and said, I don't know that we need an NFL receiver. That'd be great, but we need guys.
Not to interrupt, Corey, I'm sorry, but I can answer that question right now. They don't have a star at wide receiver.
Well, I mean, maybe they'll have one emerge, right? Maybe Caleb Brown emerges. Maybe it's the young man, Jacob Gill from Northwestern. So I think that would probably be the biggest one, Mark, because I don't know that they're buttoned up at receiver. I mean, I could name 5 or 6 guys in play, and that tells me it's an open competition. It's not like, well, we have 5 or 6 guys to rotate. It's not like offensive line where Kirk apparently feels like they got 7 starters. I think they got maybe 6 or 7 guys at receiver where they got to figure out who are our best 3. Do we have 3 starting caliber receivers? So that would be the position I'd say number 1. And obviously you're curious about quarterback, and Sullivan or Linez make some sort of a push on Cade McNamara. I mean, I don't think a lot of people expect that to happen. I think most people expect Cade to be the starter week 1. I think Kirk expects Cade to be the starter at week 1. Hey, you mentioned tight end, and I think they go 3 deep clearly at tight end with Johnny Pascuzzi. Remember, he entered the portal during the offseason and then withdrew from the portal. So to me, you've got a clear top 3 there. And safety, yeah. I mean, you got 2 really experienced guys in Quinn Schulte and Xavier Wampa. You have, guys at corner, Jamari Harris, and then probably a battle for that other job between TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, and John Nestor. So there's a battle to look for, but obviously Jamari is a cemented starter. And what am I missing? Defensive line. I think that is pretty much set in stone, barring injury, who the starters are. But the caveat with defensive line, as you know, Mark, is Iowa likes to run 7 or 8 guys at times. They don't have 7 or 8 guys right now that have proven themselves. So depth there, that's probably one of the bigger depth battle stories this fall camp. Depth that it will actually impact this season, the immediate future, with Y.A. Black, Aaron Graves in the middle, Ethan Herkett, Max Llewellyn on the outsides. Deontay Craig will be there. So there's 5 guys right there. Brian Allen, where does he mix in? Where does Jeremiah Pittman mix in? Who emerges? It's young, maybe on obvious passing situations. So there's storylines, but I agree with you. Like at the top of most of these positions, they're as buttoned up as they have been. And I think where they're buttoned up, they're as strong at those positions as they have been. Like this isn't a year of just, you got your top 3 linebackers and they're all solid. No, they've got 2 potential All-Americans there at the top. And one guy who put up ridiculous numbers last year in Jay Higgins and just got on another award watch list today. And then another guy, Nick Jackson, who's got a chance to break the all-time NCAA tackling record for a career. So yeah, they're super strong at a couple of these positions, linebacker being one, tight end being another. And then you just worry about injuries, but that's football.
Yeah, and with the injuries, if Kirk would like a little coaching advice from me, of course he doesn't need that. I'm just kidding. But I would think that because of this situation, with having a buttoned up starting lineup for the most part, 90% on both sides of the ball, that you're more concerned with, okay, it's not a defensive end battle. It's not a outside linebacker battle between these 2 or 3 guys. We've got a set lineup. We are simply preparing these guys, just making sure the rust is off. They're ready to go. So therefore, we can back off the throttle on all these established players for the entirety of August. Of course, they got to be pushed. It's football to prepare themselves for a physical 12 games going forward plus. But, and of course, Kirk and his staff, they know the team and they know how to prepare players as well as anyone. But there's that we don't need to see player 1, 2, and 3 at inside linebacker go at it full throttle for weeks to see who's the best player because we've got to find a starter. We got the starter, so we can kind of push him back, just make sure he's got the rust off. So there's much less chance that he's going to get hurt, and we get to see the backups more often, push them, develop them, get them ready in case there's an injury, and figure out who's going to emerge out of these 4 guys, let's say, for a particular backup position to see who's the best and focus more on camp being that level decision-making process.
The Big Ten Network asked Kirk during its time with Coach Ferentz last week about how the experience at the top and kind of what you're talking about, the maturation, the veteran leadership of this group, how it affects, especially on the defensive end, how it affects preparation during fall camp. And Kirk acknowledged that it does affect them. It does change how he approaches certain things. And he said the biggest battle that they have on their hands, especially the defense, is complacency with guys that are this old and this experienced. And so that's a battle, but I also think it's fair to say that Kirk is likely, this staff is going to be very careful with guys. Like, you want to take rust off, but if there's guys at all dinged up, say Jay Higgins gets a stinger during the first day of fall camp. They are going to be abundantly careful with all of these guys. They've played a lot of football. And, I go back to what happened with Cade McNamara during Kids Day. Freak injuries can't always be planned for. But I think we all, well, maybe not all of us. I would say this, and I know Coach Patterson said it on the air. We'll never know what would have happened had Cade been healthy during those first 4 games. But when you are playing less than 100%, you're more prone to injury. Okay, that can be proven. So I'm not saying that Cade's injury was in direct relation to the injury he suffered during Kids Day. But those are the types of things you want your guys to be fresh. You want them to be sharp, but you also don't want them to be playing less than 100% and be prone to more serious injury. And so hey, here's the deal. I hope at Kids Day, I don't want anybody to be injured, but I hope we get a good look at guys like Carson Shire at linebacker, guys like Jaden Harrell at linebacker. I hope we can see all of these corners running against the ones and see who looks better. I don't know if you've seen this on social media, Mark, over the last week. Ever since Iowa put out a pre-fall camp depth chart, certain segments of social media have gone crazy. And I think most of it's tongue-in-cheek, but this huge thing about, oh my goodness, Iowa's got another white cornerback, another great white cornerback. I'm telling you, it's out there. I've seen it because John Nestor was listed as your starting cornerback, and Iowa's produced 2 recent cornerbacks that happen to both be white to the league. See, we got to make things white and black. But anyways, John Nestor is listed as a starter right now, but he's never been a starter. So it should be a fun competition this fall between him and 2 guys who have had longer time with the program. Deshaun Lee's, a 3rd-year guy now? And TJ Hall, I believe, is a 3rd-year guy. Both of those guys have played in Big Ten games, Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall. And so to have John Nestor listed above them, that does raise an eyebrow, but that makes me think, hey, we're going to have some healthy competition at that spot opposite of Jamari Harris. And what you said earlier rings true, Mark. Jamari's been a little injury prone at times. Okay. He was also off the field last year due to the gambling stuff. But if you have a trio of DBs that are competing for one spot on one side, you're going to be more equipped to deal with potential injury to a veteran like Jamari as the season goes on. And that's a position where Iowa typically runs through a number of guys through the season. It seems like corner is a position where guys get injured.
So let me ask you this, because I'm going back to what you point out from time to time concerning the way this defense is run, that you've got cornerback, and regardless of the talent on the other side that you're playing, they play their positions, correct?
Well, I think Phil's gotten, yes, but I think Phil has gotten a little bit more comfortable. We've seen him toy with that when he's got a cornerback that he trusts, like a Cooper DeJean. And I have to go back to the Ohio State game 2 years ago, but I believe Riley Moss, I think he followed, what's his name? Is it Jackson Smith and Jigba or Harrison? One of the guys, one of those 2. Yeah. It didn't really matter because they're all ridiculously talented, but he's become a little less. I think he's been burned a time or 2. I think back to 2018 against Purdue, they got burned like 4 or 5 times down the sidelines to the same receiver. And eventually at the end of that drive, I think Phil just is like, all right, I think might have been Ojemudia. I don't remember it might have been Matt Hankins who was playing opposite the field. And, he was going with several young guys back to back to back, and none of them could defend this guy. And so he kind of went against the grain. So, Phil's got a little bit of stubbornness in him. And that's one thing that's made him great, but it's also one thing that's at times cost him. So I think I think his mindset's maybe a little bit more open to switching that. But yes, traditionally you have your left corner and you have your right corner, and they stay on their sides of the field.
Because in the situation we're talking about right now, what I'm envisioning is you've got Harris locked down on a spot. You got the other 3 guys battling for the other spot. It's not like, let's say you have 50 reps, 50, 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, where you're playing football, and you don't just say, well, Harris, you're playing 50 consecutive plays because that's your corner spot. No, he's established. He's the starter. Keep him sharp. Maybe he plays 15 plays, 20 plays instead of 50, and you work the other guys through on both sides and get them more reps.
Yeah, and I think that will happen. I think Phil is intelligent enough to know that, and he's had the experience of having one really solidified corner and having to deal with injuries and having to deal with snaps and reps during fall camp. So I would guess that will happen. And I don't know who's listed technically. The fourth corner is listed behind Jamari on the one side of the field. So I think there's going to be some flexibility. I guarantee you there will be. They're not going to breed three guys to play on one side of the field. I will say this, and it was brought to my attention here recently, that when you look at what this offense is able to do, pre-snap motion, all that stuff, we saw a little bit of that in the spring, and the defense. I remember interviewing a couple of these players down the field after that open practice, and they brought up the fact that it's put a heavier burden on even some of the more experienced guys to figure out what the offense is doing pre-snap. I think that's going to be a storyline to follow during fall camp, especially for these young guys. And they've got to, I mean, I was blessed with experience there at your most important positions like free safety and middle linebacker. But I would think, I'd have to think that I was going to use some serious time in this fall camp to get some of these younger guys who are totally green and don't have a lot of past experience to either fall back on or perhaps could act as a hindrance because you're learning to play against a new system in practice. I think these young guys are going to be tested upstairs mentally because of all the pre-snap stuff that Tim Lester's offense throws at them. And that just wasn't the case under Brian. Now, how much will that impact how they play on Saturdays once you get into Big Ten play? I'm not some X's and O's guru to tell you how many offenses in the conference run the amount of pre-snap stuff that Tim's does, but that's going to be something I think there's a lot of, if you had to ask Kirk Ferentz, he'd probably give you a list of 50 things that they have on their list to figure out this fall camp.
Sure. And that's what makes him as good as he is. And any coach, they don't make assumptions. They don't rest on, even if it's the best unit group considered in the country, whether that's at linebacker or at in the secondary as a whole, to say, oh, we got the best linebackers in the country. They don't need to improve. Of course they do. So two positions here. And one, I started off in the offseason hitting hard was the quarterback position. Then the other one was the wide receiver position, to say, you need to go out and get a quarterback. And I harped on that, of course, for a long time. And they finally did when they got Brendan Sullivan. So I applaud that. I think that's a great, obviously, as we both agreed, I think Cade McNamara has been injury prone, number one. Number two, Cade McNamara is not Peyton Manning. And number three, he may not win the quarterback spot. So why not get a quality backup quarterback that can take you to where you want to go, even if the starter gets hurt? So they've done that. So I applaud them for that. They did that. It didn't look like it was going to happen for a long, long time. But they still, when I'm watching Iowa this fall, I know that there's going to be a few times when I'm like, why didn't you go to the portal and get a receiver or two or three?
I don't know. I don't know about that. You could be right. You could be right. But I again, I'm going to continue to double down on my stance that I've been making for several months. I think Tim Lester is going to make this receiver room look a lot better than it ever has. And I think the expectations, even from people on the outside like yourself, the expectations for this room and the wideouts and the passing game, the expectations are so low. Unless they just totally regress with tight end play. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think Tim's going to embrace that. I think he has embraced that. I think he realizes, Kirk even brought it up last week. Kirk is really excited about Addison Estringa. And this is his third year in the program. Played a lot last year with the injuries to All and Lachey. But to have him as, Luke Lachey's backup or his sidekick, if you will, that's a luxury. And Kirk's had a lot of great tight end duos, Mark, between Hawkinson and Fant and Kittle and Krieger Coble. And I mean, you go down the line, Lachey and all before those guys went down last year, Laporta and Lachey. I think he's really excited about those guys. So I think the tight end play is likely to stay the same. I just think Tim is going to get more out of the guys that he's got. And he got one of his guys. I'd like to think it's one of his guys in Jacob Gill. I know that was an easy, I mean, hopefully it was a perfect trade-off, right? It was an easy trade-off because they got Sullivan. Sullivan and Gill were roommates at Northwestern. But he is a guy who, and Jacob said this, made this comment to me and has made this comment to other people in the media, that Tim sold him on the idea that he can be used, and people can laugh if they want, but that he can be used similar to what Tim did with a guy like Sky Moore, because they're similar in size, and Jacob Gill believes, and apparently Tim sees something there. Jacob believes that he's got some of the same skills, strengths as a guy like Sky Moore. Undersized, but exceptional speed. Now, we've yet to see that, right? We really didn't see that demonstrated much at Northwestern. But Mark, here's the other thing about like everybody wants to go back to Northwestern and talk about how Jacob Gill didn't really do much of anything there. Have we? I mean, their receiver core has been better than Iowa's in recent time. But when have we ever raved about Northwestern's ability to get the ball downfield to receivers? So, I mean, yes, he went from Northwestern to Iowa, but this is an Iowa team with a new coordinator and a new offense. So perhaps for the first time in how long, we'll see an Iowa receiver that actually, or I should say an Iowa situation at Iowa that makes a receiver who transferred in from a different school actually look better. Usually it's the opposite, right? Usually it's the opposite. Guys like Charlie Jones, Trent, now that's an extreme example, but we all know that what happened there. Maybe it will be the opposite. I don't obviously expect any sort of production. They'll never get production like what we saw to Charlie Jones at Purdue. But if you can have three guys that are, solid to above solid, to complement two really strong tight ends, a veteran offensive line, and running back room, I don't know how this offense doesn't get substantially better. If what Kirk said about 7 offensive linemen being starter level guys, then Mark, how on earth is this offense not going to be better? Like not even taking into account the Tim Lester variable, which I think is the main thing at hand. But Kirk made that statement. I think it's the biggest thing to take away from Media Day. 7 starting offensive linemen. That's a big statement for a guy who's normally pretty, non-bullish, right? He's usually very hesitant to anoint guys.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest takeaway. If they have that number of guys and with the depth they have at running back, your run game gets going even without great wide receiver production. Boy, you're solid everywhere you need to be. And if your offensive line is potentially that good, it's going to only help the cause for either Sullivan or McNamara. And they don't have to be great. We've seen adequate Iowa offenses in the last 2 decades where you had average at best quarterback play, and they're at least able to move the ball, control the line of scrimmage, and perhaps this time take advantage of things like waste downs and situations that Brian Ferentz failed to take advantage of the last 7 years. So I'm excited from that standpoint to see how all these things interrelate and how they coincide with what we are told is a much better offensive line.
If offensive line and wide receiver come together the way you depict, not that you're making a prediction, you kind of are on the wide receiver portion of it, but you're taking the lead from Kirk on the offensive line. Why can't this team win the Big Ten championship? Why can't this team be a deep college football playoff contender if they're great on defense? They are Ohio State, Michigan, whoever you want to throw in there. They're one of the 3 or 5 best defenses in the country. And then if they're capable on offense.
I saw, it was yesterday, I don't know who it was. You have all these college football accounts nowadays, and you don't which ones are actually run by people who know what they're talking about. But there was a post on social media that kind of went viral of a predictive, not model, but a prediction, season end prediction for the Big Ten. And Iowa was projected as 11-1. And I think UCLA and Illinois were tied at 0-9. I believe, in the conference. But Iowa was 8-1 and 11-1 overall. Now, again, who cares what this random person had to say or what computer spat that out? But that goes to show exactly what we've talked about. We've talked about the 7.5 over under from Vegas, all that stuff. But I mean, I don't see them go. I'm not saying that you just throw the Ohio State game out the window, but I don't think anybody can really project Iowa to win that game. And if we're talking about the Big Ten title, all right, I haven't looked at Ohio State's schedule, but assuming they win against Iowa in Columbus, Iowa would have to, well, let's see, top two go. See, I don't even remember the format. Top two goes to the Big Ten championship game now, right?
Yeah.
So what we're going to have to talk about more is what are the tiebreakers, for number two, if you have three teams tied. I think that's probably going to come into play at some point, maybe sooner rather than later. If Iowa goes 11-1, it'll probably come into play. I mean, I think it most definitely would come into play.
Yeah. I don't see any way around it, because if Ohio State goes undefeated, I'm not predicting that, but let's say they go undefeated, they beat Iowa. That's Iowa's only loss. Well, that means Ohio State would have beaten Michigan and they would have beaten Oregon.
Okay, and where is
Penn State?
So where do Penn State and Oregon play each other? Do Michigan and Penn State play each other? Like that
Michigan
would be the next
plays
question.
Oregon. I don't know about Oregon, Penn State. Michigan and Penn State do not play this year.
Okay. So it's possible that there's a few teams there that have more difficult schedules that bully up on each other and end up with 2 losses apiece. That's possible. And so then Iowa's just in a 2-way tie for third place or for second place. And then you have to ask yourself, hey, Iowa didn't play Oregon. They didn't play Michigan. They didn't play Penn State. So whoever they're tied with, what is the next tiebreaker? If they don't play each other and there's no more divisions to look at record against your division.
Well, the most likely, let's get back to Ohio State real quick, because the most likely scenario for them is that they're going to lose a game. It's difficult, extremely difficult to go undefeated. So they'll probably reach their norm and go 11-1. So that will have meant that they went to Oregon and lost, or they lost at Penn State or lost to Michigan. So maybe it's a 3 or 4-way tie. Yeah. It's interesting because there's a difference between the tiebreakers if you have 4 teams tied for first place, and then you have to determine both spots, versus there's a clear number 1, and then there's 3 or 4 teams that are tied for number 2, and then you're just determining that.
And I think it could get very convoluted if Iowa was one of those teams in the top 3 with a 2-way tie for second, given the fact that Iowa didn't play any of those other teams. This is not a committee selecting who goes to the Big Ten championship game. This is based on specific measures and protocol in place. And that's going to make some people upset, obviously. Like if Iowa somehow beats out a Penn State for that second spot and they had the same record, but the tiebreaker somehow favors Iowa, Penn State fans are going to be ticked because they're going to look at their record and say, look at our wins are better. Now, they're going to get in the playoff either way, right? So that third team, the team that's left out of Big Ten title game, they're going to get in the playoff as long as they're, especially at Penn State, if they've got it sounds like they got a pretty difficult schedule. 10-2 gets them in, I would think. I know Keith in the chat, 10-2 won't get Iowa in. ISU can go 9-3 and get in by winning the Big 12 championship game. So is this, he's just stating this like he knows, like this is the first year of the playoff, of the 12-team playoff, and we're already acting like we know exactly what the committee is going to do and not do.
Well, first of all,
I disagree with Keith on that completely.
Well,
but he has a right to his opinion.
It's an apples and oranges argument that he's making. Yes, Iowa State could go 8-4 and go 6-3 in the conference, lose to Iowa, go 6-3 in the conference, go 8-4, win the Big 12 championship game, and go to the playoff.
They're in.
That has nothing to do with a committee selecting the best teams in the country to fill the spot. That is an automatic bid.
So why did he bring up going 9-3?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what they are. If they win the Big 12 championship, they win the Big 12 championship.
I suppose they could, like you said, 8-4, they go 7-5, they lose all 3 of their non-conference games, or they play 4 conference games now.
3.
Or 4 non-conference. They play 3.
Yeah.
So you could win none of your non-conference games
Well,
and
yeah.
probably still get in with a 7-2 conference record.
Yeah.
You're 7-5.
Yeah. You could. I didn't take it to that extreme, but still.
Yeah.
They could go 6-3 in that balanced conference, still playing the conference championship game, lose to Iowa. They got 4 losses. They're going to the playoff, and they're a top 4 seed.
Mark, let me give you a dark. I told you this here, I think, a week ago. Let me give you a dark horse team. I think you and I were talking on the phone when we brought this up. A dark horse, not team, but game.
Okay.
Early in the season, UNI, Northern Iowa, travels to take on Nebraska. That I don't know the last time that's happened. Maybe it's happened, and it's because it's normally Iowa or Iowa State. I don't know who else is on UNI's schedule. Of course, Iowa doesn't play them, but that is a dangerous game. And you and I both know that Iowa fans will be rooting heavily for the Panthers. But can you imagine if they lose that game to an FCS opponent? Very similar situation to, I would say, what we saw in 2016 with Iowa. I don't know what Nebraska's are they about 7.5 their over under prediction for the season per Vegas?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe not extreme as what happened in 2016, but that was a really good North Dakota State team that's physical up front. UNI is always really good up front. And I think that's a dangerous game for Huskerland.
Yeah, that's a good call. We shall see. It's funny that you're picking that as a under the radar game.
Well,
Because I
was going to say real quick, it's also the week after the game against Colorado.
Yeah.
It's in a very tricky spot because it's between that game and the start of Big Ten play. If I'm playing an FCS opponent, Mark, I'd rather get them week 1. Like Iowa did with South Dakota State 2 years ago. Oh, and by the way, when Iowa lost to North Dakota State in 2016, that game was about 3 weeks into the season. It was not a season opening game. I think that's I don't know the data behind that, but I would just think, especially given the makeup of the schedule, I'd rather if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'd rather play UTEP week 3 and get. And I don't know anything about UTEP.
They're awful.
Okay, well, I'd rather play UTEP because I'm guessing if you had UTEP and Northern Iowa match up against one another, I would guess that'd be a very close game.
Yeah. UTEP fired its coach. They went 3-9 last year, and that's pretty much their history. They go 3-9 every year. That's pretty much what they do.
So you're telling me you're not going to be launching a UTEP at the Voice of College Football channel?
Probably
right?
not. I did put them in my program rankings, though. They were down around 128, 129. When is the last time, because I've seen these lists pertaining to Big Ten schools, when is the last time Iowa lost to a group of 5 team?
That's a great question. I could figure that out if you give me a minute. Last time they lost to a G5 team. Well, yeah, I mean, what comes to my mind is the loss to the FCS. So I don't know. 2016, 2015, 2014, almost lost to Ball State in 2014. Needed a heroic comeback to win that game. 2013 was a battle against. They lost to Northern Illinois, didn't they, in like 2011 or 12?
That sounds right.
I believe that might be the last time, and that was at the game at Soldier Field. And was that a Jordan Lynch game? I'm throwing stuff out there. I don't know 100% that I'm right. Jackson says Northern Illinois in 13. I thought they won that game in 13. So maybe they lost in 13 and then won in 14. And I'm guessing 13 was at Soldier Field. In 14 was in Iowa City. I guess that could be right. Maybe I'm a year behind. Connor brings up they did have a loss way back when against Central Michigan. What are we looking at here? 2014.
There's 2013, lost to Northern Illinois, who was a 12-2 football team that year, 30-27.
And that was, it doesn't say, but I'm pretty sure that game was at Soldier Field. Well, actually, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, because it would say that this site. States if it's
that must have been the game I was at that game. And I believe Iowa lost on a field goal. So 30-27. So I think I remember that game. I was in the north end zone before the north end zone was built up to what it is now. And Iowa just completely squandered that thing. That was a disgrace. Total disgrace, Mark. That was a good, hey, You talk about best linebacking cores of the Kirk era. That was at least a top 5, maybe top 3. That was Kirksey, Hitchens, and Morris. That was a really good group of linebackers. Very, very reminiscent, I think, of the athleticism you have in the room this year with Jackson and with Higgins and Kyler Fisher. Obviously, got the groups with Jewell and Bauer and Cole Fisher, and then the group with Campbell, Benson, those guys. That'd be a great discussion. We haven't done that. We've ranked all-time players, Mark, but all-time units would be a fun off-season topic. We'll have to come back to that in 25.
We can do that. There are all sorts of excited fans in the chat, and understandably so, predicting 11-1. When is the last time that you went into a season with this football team, both based on your perspective and what you're seeing out of the fans and their optimism, that there was that lofty of a record expectation?
Well, I think from me, and this is probably some bias speaking, I think 2016 was a year where we were all coming off the high of 12-0. And yes, they lost last second touchdown from LJ Scott and Michigan State in the Big Ten Championship game. They got blitzkrieged by Stanford in the Rose Bowl. But Mark, when you go 12-0 and then you return Desmond King and CJ Beathard and George Kittle and all those guys, there was serious expectation. That's why 2016 was such a disappointment. They followed it up, or finished it out, I should say, by getting blown out by Florida, game I was at as well. So I'd say 2016. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at what I predicted. I probably predicted at least 10-2 in 2016. Now you'll recall this, Mark, that last year's schedule was very favorable. And Iowa was going into the year with, we expected a much better quarterback situation in Cade McNamara before he went down, a really solid tight end group in Eric All and Luke Lachey. Both those guys go down. So, I think obviously in hindsight, it was more dependent on health because, in my opinion, Iowa had a quarterbacks coach and an offensive coordinator that was very much going to be hamstrung if anything bad happened. And football is a game where bad things from an injury standpoint do happen. And so you lose maybe your 3 best players on offense. Cade may not be one of your best players, but he's probably your most important player last year on that offense. And then Eric All and Luke Lachey are probably your 2 best offensive players. So that really hurt them, and they just weren't able to overcome it. But I don't remember what I predicted last. I'm guessing I predicted 10-2 last year. I'd have to go back. Do you remember those conversations that you and I had? I think I predicted 10-2 last year.
I'm pretty sure I predicted 9-3 and a tie with Wisconsin at the top, and I don't remember who I picked to win the game.
Yeah. I think I picked 10-2. I have not come out with my predictions so far this year. I'm guessing you have not either. But I've said it before. I think it's really hard to expect 11-1 because, especially when it would be different, Mark, if you had 10 games that were extremely winnable and then 2 games against difficult opponents. But they've got 11 games that are extremely winnable and then 1 game against someone that basically nobody thinks they have a shot against. And that's probably unfair. I know you're a Buckeye at heart. You probably scoff at that and think, well, that's a trap game for
we've
Ohio
had that
State
discussion, and I said that I think I was being discredited, and I think it could be a game. Now, would I be surprised if Ohio State won 38-10? No, I just think that they're that talented, but I don't expect that, and I would not be surprised if Iowa won the game.
I think, and I'm going to be coming out with my positional rankings on the defensive side tomorrow. So people want to, Thursday. I'll tell everybody this, just making a little announcement on the show, Mark. I've got Coach Patterson coming on with me live tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Central Time. So we'll have a live edition of Hawkeye Hangout at first day of fall camp. And so we'll be taking questions and chats and whatnot. So that will be fun. And then Thursday, I'll be coming out with a podcast with my positional rankings on defense. I did that for offense last month. But the reason I bring that up is when I rank, I haven't done it yet, but when I go through and rank the positions on defense, corner will still probably be at the bottom. It'll be between corner and defensive line. I don't think there's much of any debate there. So against Ohio State. Now, I know they lost Marvin Harrison Jr. They've lost so much talent at wideout. You and I both know that. I know it's a different offense to some extent with Chip Kelly, but I just see this and I think that's a bad matchup for Iowa. Even if Iowa is solid everywhere else, the one position that traditionally Ohio State burns you at time and time and time again is wide receiver. And, to think that Iowa was pretty strong at receiver 2 years ago and still got killed by guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., that says something. Now, we don't know what Will Howard is going to do. It sounds like maybe Ohio State's stronger on the ground. I don't know how that's going to affect. I mean, obviously that offense is projected to be probably the best in the country, but they've got maybe 2 of the top 5 running backs in the country. Is that fair to maybe surmise?
I see some All-America teams. Now, this is a bit ridiculous because if they share too many carries, they're not going to have the stats to justify it. But if you're just saying we believe that these are the best players, regardless of how much the stats add up, I see multiple publications that have their running backs first and second team All-American.
So that's the question then, Mark. Like, it depends. Potentially, we're projecting this forward a lot of season until we get there. But that Ohio State game, like, what's the game plan? What's the approach from Ohio State heading into that game? Because if they get to that game and they've just been able to run all over everybody, Mark, and they approach that game that way, that would be the little bit of hope, the sliver of hope for Iowa that I'd be looking at and saying, hey, these guys are a little bit overconfident with this rushing attack. And what does Iowa do best? They stop the run. Mm-hmm. And what do they have? What position are they strongest at? It's maybe not the defensive line as a whole, but they got 2 really good interior guys and a couple of linebackers who find the football. So I think that would be my big thing. How do they approach the game? Game plan will be a very interesting conversation leading into Ohio State.
Yeah. Ohio State's really tricky because, they've got 2 of the best running backs in the country. They're loaded at wide receiver, although they're inexperienced after Emeka Egbuka. They are loaded with talent, but they only have about 25 catches coming back from the rest of those guys. They're all.
And so but there's an example. There's one you brought up earlier, the conversation about Jamari Harris. Is Iowa comfortable letting Jamari Harris kind of shadow? I mean, we'll see what these other. I'm sure it'll all depend on what John Nestor and Deshaun Lee and those guys look like in fall camp and first month of the season. But is Phil going to be comfortable letting Jamari Harris live on an island with Egbuka? Because he is the clear guy. They don't. Maybe that's the one chink in the armor. Although they got tons of talent, seems like for the last how many years, it's either been Harrison or it's been Fleming or it's been what's his face who was hurt, Smith and Jigba.
Sure, yeah.
So now maybe there's some question marks there, but my guess is Ryan Day and company will figure out, who the next guy is after Egbuka within the first month of the season.
Yeah. Well, they do have the number 1 player in the country coming in, Jeremiah Smith, who it's a lot to put on a true freshman, but the players were saying at Big Ten Media Days last week, like this is ridiculous how good this guy is.
Yeah. Ed Rogers says, J.J. Smith is starting as a freshman. You can't check him. I'm guessing Ed Rogers is an Ohio State fan. Is that right, Mark?
He is. No, he's not too far off, but that's hyperbole. The guy's never played, never caught a pass, but yeah, it should be quite the affair in Columbus. Absolutely. When you bring up predictions, I just internally think, for me, looking at the national scene and the Big Ten related, I just have to determine is Will Howard going to be good enough to get it all done? Because I think that's what it's going to come down to for that team. All right. Appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. Catch Corey, of course, daily at from the Hawkeye of the Storm, but specifically on Wednesday night with Don Patterson. And that's at what time?
8 p.m. Central Time.
8 Central. And the audio, if you enjoyed the audio from Corey's broadcast, but also from this one in particular, it's also at the from the Hawkeye of the Storm as well. Corey, thanks for making this happen as always. And folks, we'll see you back here next Tuesday at 4:30 Central. Nebraska Live is coming up in a half hour over on the Nebraska channel. So we will see you over there.